Three, two, one.
Hi, my name is Chad Foster, author of Blind Ambition: How to Go from Victim to Visionary. And happiness for me is not a feeling and it's not an emotion. It's a decision that you make every single day when you wake up. You have the opportunity to anchor your perspective to the things in life to be grateful for, which informs your happiness. A lot of people think that happiness leads to gratitude. I think it's the opposite. I think it's gratitude that leads to happiness.
Wow. That's fantastic. I love that, Chad. I
Thank
totally
you.
agree with everything that you said about that. So, first, congratulations on your book, Blind Ambition. Fantastic read. Everybody should get a copy of that. But second,
Thank you.
when did you learn that about happiness and about gratitude, Chad?
Well, I learned it the hard way. I didn't read it in a book somewhere. I learned it after I went blind at 21 years old due to an inherited retinal condition called retinitis pigmentosa, or RP for short. And I learned that lesson when I was actually 23 years old at Rochester Hills, Michigan, at Leader Dogs for the Blind, where I was getting my first guide dog while I was there. And I met some folks there who really put things in focus for me. Many of them were facing far more challenges than I was facing. I'd rolled into that facility with the victim mentality, and I learned very quickly, the people around me there were facing far more than I was. Some of them had mental impairments. Some of them had diabetes, so they were going to regular dialysis appointments on top of being blind. And then there were these girls there whom I'll never forget, who were deaf and blind. And
Oof.
the living courage exhibited by these brave souls left me ashamed of my pathetic attitude. And it really shined a light for me on the importance of gratitude and anchoring ourselves to a perspective filled with gratitude, which can illuminate our paths to happiness and success and joy.
Wow. Wow. That's quite a lesson to be learned for sure, man. That's unlike many of us have to face. Congratulations on powering through that and understanding the big lesson, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things that you don't really want to have to sign up for it. It comes with a heavy price tag to learn it, but I would much rather have learned that lesson at 23 years old than to live my entire life never knowing that. I think up until that point, like many people, I kind of thought happiness was this elusive goal and success was this elusive goal. It's always the next thing. What's the next accomplishment, the next trophy I'm going to put in the trophy case? Oh, when I get X, I'll be happy. When I get to Y, I'll be successful. And this completely reshaped my perspective as it relates to both of those concepts, happiness and success. It showed me that happiness comes from inside of you, not from outside of you. Anytime that you leave your happiness precariously in the hands of external circumstances, these random things that may or may not happen, your entire life really is at stake here. Your joy, your fulfillment, all those things are precariously in the hands of things that you have no control over. And so I learned at a very early age, at least the way that I look at it, 23, being able to control my own sense of happiness and fulfillment from inside of me, the things that I can control, not leaving it to chance with random circumstances that take place.
Excellent. Wow, that's a great lesson for all of us, Chad. You don't have to be blind to know that that's a powerful lesson for anybody. So with that, you wrote a book, Blind Ambition,
I
and
did.
part of the book is about your journey, and which I thought found very inspiring. So talk to me about your first experiences with email. I think that's fascinating that you can use email as someone who doesn't have sight. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I guess I was actually at Leader Dogs for the Blind. And one of the guys there, he's my roommate at Leader Dogs for the Blind. I'm 23 years old, and here's this older guy. He's maybe in his early 40s. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to go down to the library and check my email. And I'm like, how are you going to check your email? I mean, P.S., don't you remember you're blind? What's going on here? He's like, oh, yeah, they have software on a computer that talks to you. It's called JAWS. You haven't heard of it? And I'm sitting there like, wait, I'm 23 years old. I'm in college. I consider myself, a pretty well-studied person, and I had no clue about the technology that was out there. And so it really demonstrated to me that I had a long way to go. And I think a lot of that was just simply the fact that I was in denial up until that point. I didn't really want to be blind and didn't want to have to face the music that I was blind and I couldn't see that well anymore, and eyesight was fading fast. But when my roommate told me he was going to do that, it obviously compelled me to want to learn more and figure out, hey, wait, how do blind people read email?
Yeah. It's great that there's a solution for that. And it's great that you've learned that lesson early on, because that certainly has enabled you to do some great things. If we skip ahead to one of the great things that you've done, you actually developed a CRM that actually is for the blind people. Is that correct? Or for sight impaired? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I was working at the time in Northern Virginia, and a former colleague of mine from Accenture was known as Anderson Consulting. This is huge technology consulting company. My first job out of college was with them. And so a former colleague from Accenture gave me a call and told me that they had a customer who had a blind employee who couldn't do his job because of a problem between the screen reading software that was used by the blind, called JAWS, and their CRM software called Siebel, which was owned at the time by Oracle. It was their high interactivity framework. It was a sort of a thin client solution buried in a browser, and there was no accessibility for it. And so I sat down and I wrote some code so that this guy could do his job and get him up and running for a year or two. He's using the code that I wrote. Took me some time to figure out how to do it. I later found out that Oracle, the owner of that application, just thought it couldn't be done. They were telling people that it wasn't possible. Meanwhile, I'd already done it for this guy. And so the next thing I know, I'm on the phone with Oracle and Freedom Scientific, the maker of JAWS, and they're figuring out that I'd actually written this solution to build a bridge between these two software programs. And the next thing I know, Oracle is sending me referral business. And I actually got called to testify in a court case, which was not quite as fun, but just talking about how it is possible to make those two systems work with one another, because up until that point, nobody ever thought it could be done.
Wow. So tell me about that code, man. Like, what was the whole genesis, or the whole idea behind that? I mean, that's so interesting, because I would think that if Oracle said it couldn't be done, that it probably couldn't be done. So tell me about, like, what did you do there?
Well, I think ignorance is bliss. I didn't know that it wasn't supposed to be done. So I was curious, and I kind of reverse engineered, and it gets a little complicated here. I'll try and keep it pretty simple for folks, but essentially there's a thin client environment where you've got an application buried inside of a web browser. And so you had things that were built into the HTML source code, and you had things that were part of an ActiveX control. And so some of them looked like traditional applications, these widgets, but the labels and widgets associated with those Windows type applications were buried in the HTML source code. And so what I had to do was figure out how to extract and cache the HTML source code and then map that to the on-screen ActiveX controls, and then do that on the fly and provide not only labels for the fields, but keyboard navigation to all the fields for people who use JAWS, accessing hyperlinks, navigating applets, all these different things. And so once I had mapped the HTML source code to the on-screen elements, it got much simpler from there. But first it was figuring out that there was a way to draw a map between those two elements. And I don't think anybody had really explored how to do that before. And so I just figured out a way to extract it and then cache it and then map it to the on-screen elements.
Wow. Well, being a former IT guy, that's pretty impressive, Chad. I think that's a lot of work, man. And that's pretty darn impressive that you could do that, whether you have sight or not, man. That's a hard job.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't for the faint of heart. There were some times when I got in there, I had, many thousands of lines of code trying to debug and diagnose, obviously doing it all with my eyes closed. And then I had to have multiple language support. It was for French and English as well. Well, the first iteration was English, and then I ended up doing it for a large bank in Canada, and then some government agencies in Canada as well. So there were French versions and English versions and all that, but it ended up working out pretty well. My wife, who had thought that writing code was a little bit of a hobby at that point, wasn't really sure where it would go, what I was doing. And then I bought our first vacation home with the checks that came in. And then she saw pretty quickly what maybe this is real. Maybe I should pay attention to this.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. And I have to tell you, I love that you make kind of sight jokes there. You're making me laugh, man. That's pretty good.
Well, we've got to laugh, man. We've got to have a good time. I mean, yeah, I face what many would consider to be, a serious condition, but I don't take my situation so seriously that I can't have fun. I take my work seriously and I want to do meaningful work and make a difference. But at the end of the day, if I can't laugh and have a good time along the way, poking a little fun at myself too, what's the point of being here?
Yeah, I agree. Take yourself not so seriously. Take your work very seriously. That's my philosophy as well, Chad. So
Love it.
that's beautiful. Well, so much great stuff inside the book. One of the things that's super inspiring is you got your master's from Harvard, and was the first person to get your master's from Harvard Business School. Is that right?
Yeah, I was the first blind executive to attend the program for leadership development program up there, and it was a really meaningful experience for me. A lot of people think you go to Harvard and you're going to learn all about case studies and business metrics and all those things. And certainly we did, but I think the thing that stands out for me is how I learned what my true north is. And that came from the class that I took, Authentic Leadership, with Bill George, who is the former chairman and CEO of Medtronic. And he teaches leaders how to discover their true north. And during that class at Harvard, although I went there because my company sponsored me to go because I brought in billions of dollars of revenue for the company, it was a great privilege to be able to go. And they signed off the 6-figure check for me to be able to do that. While I was there, I actually discovered that my true north was something I hadn't fully explored. And it put me on the path that I'm on today.
Yeah. Well, I got that from the book, and that was really that's a great lesson, a great opportunity for you as well. So what is your true north, Chad?
I think, Phil, my true north is helping people learn about the anatomy of resilience so that I can empower them to not be victims of their circumstances. And so I used to take what I've been through for granted. I've had some difficult situations. Many of us have, going blind at 21 years old, learning the limitations of my eyesight as a youth, growing up, running into things at dusk or at night, many trips to the hospital, them questioning whether or not my parents were beating me because I was in the hospital so much, learning the limitations of what I could and couldn't see, and then not being able to drive a car at night, and then going blind at 21 and having to relearn how to learn and reimagine what I wanted to be when I grow up, because nobody wants to be a blind person when they grow up. So I had to figure all that out. And I never really, I wasn't really trying to do anything other than get to my next goal in life. But I realized that there were a lot of people out there, and that happened when I was at Harvard, who could really benefit from my story, because it was there at Harvard where I was elected to speak at our graduation. And I gave the talk there, and it blew people away. And it blew me away because it blew them away. I had a moment there, a really, really kind of intimate moment with this guy there comes up to me afterwards, and he's like bawling in my arms, and he's crying. And I found out later on that he had lost his daughter the year before to cancer. And I'm kind of a hard-edged person. That's how I'm wired, and that's how my situation has compelled me to be, and that's how I was raised. But that evening, when that guy is like just bawling in my arms, and I realized that I'd helped him in some way deal with this unimaginable loss, it changed me. It really inspired me to stop thinking about my own self-interest, and really compelled me to think about how I could do more for others based on what I've been through and the lessons that I've learned along the way. And it showed me in some bizarre sort of way how helping people in moments like that actually makes going blind worth it. And I don't say that lightly, but it showed me that maybe, just maybe, blindness was the beautiful gift that came disguised in some really ugly wrapping paper. And by helping people in moments like that, I may have lost my vision, but I can help other people find theirs. And so now that has become my true north. And that's what I do through my professional speaking. That's what I do with the book, coaching, and otherwise. It's really helping people, not be a victim, helping people understand what is the anatomy of resilience. How can they live happier, more successful lives and bounce back from their own setbacks better off than before?
Wow. Wow, that's fantastic. That's a great calling. That's a great true north for you. And that certainly helps a lot of other people. So let's talk about resilience, Chad. You've
Okay.
experienced a lot, but being someone who's never not had sight, I don't have the same, not to make light of it, but not the same opportunity you have to have been through resilience. So how
Yeah.
do you have a formula for resilience? Can you walk us through that, please?
I do. Yeah, I have a formula for resilience. And when I keynote, I arrange all of my storytelling around this to bring it to life. Usually that's in a 60-minute or so presentation. I'll summarize it here as quickly as I can. But the first pillar, I have 5 pillars of resilience. And so pillar number 1 is that you have got to choose your response. You have to be intentional about how you show up. And that's because nobody gets to choose the cards that they're dealt in life or in work, business, whatever, but we all get to choose how we respond. So I like to think of it like a game of cards. And that's because no player at the table gets to choose the cards that they're dealt by the dealer, but every player gets to choose how they play each card. So you have to be intentional about your response. So choose your response. The second pillar is tell yourself the right stories. And at the end of the day, I went blind at 21 years old. And essentially, I could have sat around and told myself a story that I went blind because I've got incredibly bad luck. Or I could choose to tell myself that I went blind because I'm one of the very few people on the planet who has the strength and the toughness to overcome that and use it to help other people. Now, technically, both of these stories could be true. So which story should I live by? One story frames me up as a victim, but the second story, the better story, is a Jedi mind trick that transforms my disability into my strength. And so this, if you look up the definition of resilience, a lot of times it will point to cognitive reframing. And so how do we narrate our circumstances to ourselves? The stories that we tell ourselves will either limit us or they will take us closer to our goals. So what are the stories that you're telling yourself about you and your circumstances? And how do you reframe those stories to move you towards thriving? The third pillar is visualize your greatness. And for me, I had to reimagine how I can make blind look good. And it's a little tongue in cheek, but there's a lot of truth there, because if I could never reimagine how I could look good with blindness, how could I ever move towards acceptance, let alone thriving? And so we have to reimagine a future that's bold enough to inspire us to take action, to do the hard work that we have to do, but it has to be anchored to our factual reality, the fact that I was blind. And this leads me to the fourth pillar, which is where mindset meets action, and that is get comfortable with discomfort. Because if you're never getting outside of your comfort zone, then you're not growing. It's where life begins. Life begins outside of our comfort zones. And so growth happens on the other side of discomfort. And I think maybe because I am where I am, I think in large part because my life has been an experiment of living outside of my comfort zone. So I've started to really seek out discomfort in a lot of ways, whether that's downhill skiing on a black diamond or double black diamond slope in Colorado, or training in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, where I've got large skilled men trying to choke me out or put me in an armbar. And then the fifth and final pillar of resilience that I like to talk about is take advantage of your disadvantages. And the thought behind that simply is that every perceived disadvantage offers us some advantage if we use it in the right context.
Wow. 5 simple steps, very powerful, very achievable if we work really hard to get those done. So talk to me about your skiing. How the heck did you get started skiing on black diamonds? Come on there, Chad. That's crazy. I can't do that.
Yeah, it's a little bananas. I think my wife would agree with you. She had me up my life insurance policy after I started that. But a buddy of mine called me up, and we've been friends since high school. We've been friends since we were 14 years old. And he says, "Hey, I've got a business partner out here. He's got a ski in, ski out place in Aspen, and we'd love for you to come out. They have an adaptive program out here where they help blind people ski." And I thought, you know what, Paul, that just doesn't sound all that safe. Let me look into it. Looked into it and saw that it's a really professional outfit. They have some of the best skiers and instructors in the world. And so I went out there the next year. The next thing I know, I'm trying to get on bindings for the first time at 38 years old and totally blind, trying to get down the magic carpet and the bunny slopes. And I did that for a few years, 3 times, had three days per year for the first 4 years, and had worked my way up, had tried a black by then. And by the 5th year, I was all in, hooked, and I'd skied, I think, maybe 15, 20 days that year. And every year since, we get at least 2 to 3 weeks of skiing in. And just, it was really, really, honestly, one of the most amazing feelings that you can have, not being tethered, for me, not being tethered to a dog or a cane or to a person, just really free. You feel really, really free. And the way that it works, just for those who are curious, someone skis behind me, my guide, and we're both wearing Bluetooth earpieces in our helmets so that we can communicate, and good helmets. If there's one thing a blind skier needs, it's a really good helmet, obviously. Got to have a good helmet. But they'll tell me which way to go. They'll tell me whether to bank left or right and how hard to bank left or right. And obviously it has to be crisp, trust-based communication, because there's not a lot of time for back and forth. When you're on a mountain going downhill at 50, 60 miles an hour, there's not a lot of sidebar conversations. It has to be very succinct. And so we've kind of figured out a formula to be able to pull that off. It's amazing. Every year, it's one of the things that I most look forward to.
Wow. That's inspiring, man. That's crazy. And your dog doesn't go with you, huh?
He's not a very good skier, it turns out. Yeah.
Huh.
But I don't want him on the mountain because people are coming down at a high rate of speed and they're not looking out for a German Shepherd. And if he were to get hit, it would not end well. But he does like to get out in the snow and the powder once the slopes have closed. So we'll do that. A lot of times after folks have gotten off the mountain and it's starting to wind down and get dark, we'll get him out there where he can run around and play in the snow because he loves that.
Wow. That's cool. That's cool. So give us one last piece of advice. If we want to get started embracing our discomfort, embracing our disadvantage, and making that our advantage, give us one piece of advice where we can get started with that, Chad. And before you do that, I just want to encourage folks to get a copy of Chad's book. I want to encourage you, get a copy of Blind Ambition. It's an easy read. You can go to blindambitionbook.com or go to chadefoster.com, pick up a copy of it, learn more about Chad. But Chad, how do we get started on our own journey?
Start today. It's the first step is the hardest. And although I'm the first to say you want a bold vision of greatness that's big and scary and daunting, your first step should be the exact opposite of that. Your first step should be easy, bite-sized, something that you can execute. It will probably feel uncomfortable, and that's fine. But, don't start your first time skiing on a double black diamond. Start with just getting the skis on, the bindings, and getting comfortable with the gear and the equipment and the chairlift and all that. I'm using a metaphor, obviously, but start in a low stakes environment where you can start to edge outside of your comfort zone, because the more you do, the more you'll notice that your comfort zone is expanding. And that is because you are expanding. And the more you do that, the more you'll realize, and you teach your brain that you are capable of more than you ever thought possible. And that's true for all of us. All of us are capable of more than we give ourselves credit for. And that includes you.
Wow. That's awesome. Again, friends, take a look at chadefoster.com, get yourself a copy of Blind Ambition, and get to know Chad. Chad's got a lot of great stories inside the book and all around. Hopefully you'll see him on stage somewhere close to you. If you do, run, don't walk. Be a member of the Front Row Club and check Chad out. Chad, this is awesome, man. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Phil. I appreciate it.